Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Charle Benkowitz. Hi, Charles. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Kieran. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Enjoying the break. How's yours been so far?
Yeah, it's been nice. I think everyone was ready for it. Everyone's always ready after the Christmas term.
Yeah, I find January people are quite motivated. It's almost that let's really make the most of the next couple of months in the year. We're going to focus our attention on something that I find really important, but really relatively unexplored, and that's modern foreign languages and how we teach them in schools. But I thought it might make sense because it's your first time on the podcast to start with a little bit about who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, I'm a normal primary school teacher, teaching year 4 and 5 in a school in South Yorkshire. Um, been teaching about 6 or 7 years. Just maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, started getting into the sort of the research sphere. Um, Went to research ed this year for the first time, and big fan of the show. So very flattered and slightly bemused to be on it. But looking forward to this conversation today, Kieran.
Nice. I mean, bemused is how most guests feel, so that's totally normal. Wondering about my questions. So we're going to explore modern foreign languages. What systemic differences in language education exist between UK schools and those in European countries? And how might these differences influence language learning proficiency?
I think it's a really good place to start because we could, if we went straight into thinking about what happens in the classrooms, we'd be missing probably what the most important differences. And the reason why, well, at least I think that we're not very good at it in this country, particularly at primary, which is where we want to focus today. I do have to do a little disclaimer before I start that there are a lot of peoples in the UK who do speak to three languages fluently. Um, so I definitely don't want to take a broad brush and say that every child in English schools, in UK schools, is hopeless at languages, because that's obviously not the case. But I'm mostly focusing on children taught by our system who, for the most part, only speak English as a first language. So yeah, some of the reasons, systemic reasons, I would say, are firstly the low priority that languages are given in our education system. 2004 was the year that it became no longer compulsory to study a modern foreign language till the end of your education. So after the age of 14, you didn't have to do it anymore, which is still the case today. So you have to study either a modern foreign language or an ancient language in Key Stage 2, and then in Key Stage 3 it's a modern foreign language. But for the most part, the priority we give languages is very low. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't think in my entire time teaching I've ever had any CPD on languages at all, um, which in a sense, can you imagine if we hadn't, imagine if you said, oh, I've never had any CPD on maths. No one's expecting it to have the same status in an English school, which is part of the problem, I think. Because if you look at lots of other countries in Europe, the core subjects are, for example, in Norway, it might be Norwegian, maths, and English. Or in Germany, which is where my wife grew up, the core subjects she had to study all the way through to 18 or 19 even, were German, maths, and English. So it's an enormous difference you're putting on just for how your whole system is set up. Another big factor is the low take up when languages do become optional. So the British Council every year they do a language trends review, and according to their statistics, looking at the couple of years ago, the 22 to 23 academic year, uh, 39% of the pupils were entered for the EBAC at GCSE, where you need five major components, sort of English, math, science, and then a humanities and a language. And I was quite surprised, actually, as a bit of an outsider from primary, seeing that only 39% of pupils were entered for this full EBAC. And you think, oh, what are they missing? And out of the the majority of pupils actually did take 4 out of 5. So 86% of pupils entered 4 or more of these components. But out of the ones who missed out on getting the full 5, it was nearly 90% who missed the languages. So yeah, sort of a zoomed out perspective of our education system shows that we don't really want to commit to for languages. We talk the talk of it being really important. It's in the e-back, but when it comes down to it, lots and lots of pupils are not for whatever reason they're not doing it, and then they're not either they're not feeling able to do it, or they don't they just don't want to, or it's not considered as important. So yeah, so we've got the low take up, we've got the low priority. I think probably even even more important though is the general cultural immersion into another language that we don't have here. So I've been in Germany for the last week over Christmas, and you turn on the radio, more than half of the songs will be in English. And that's something we don't have. In the Netherlands are known for being very good at learning English. Or Scandinavian countries, particularly like Norway, a lot of the media is not dubbed. So if you're watching a film, you watch it in English. And I think it's hard to underestimate just how important that is and how much of an influence that can have. One of the other factors which is really important is the the curriculum planning and the time allocation that languages gets. I think that's something we'll come on to a little bit later as well, because that's probably we can't do a huge amount about the you know children watching. We can't make children watch YouTube in French, or we can't just hope that suddenly that everyone will be listening to Spanish music overnight. But the things we can control involve how we plan for it in schools, especially in primary. And maybe just finally, another big factor is transition. So in most cases, children they have 4 years of doing a modern foreign language, but then it comes to secondary school and they basically start again. Either maybe it's that the communication often doesn't exist between the secondary school and the feeder schools. It might be even that they do French in the feeder school and then Spanish in the secondary school. Although I think for the most part that is one of the factors that schools do consider. But then the difference in abilities is well, so widespread. It's you could have a whole class who are actually really quite competent in the second language that they're going to go and speak, but then they might be all mixed up with the other pupils from different schools who've had only really a cursory introduction over the last few years. So yeah, they have to basically start again. So I guess what would be useful. So well, like we said, which language that is to be studied, but also some kind of honest assessment between the year 6 teacher perhaps, and then the language coordinator in the secondary school about where a class is. But it's always going to be quite difficult to pin down how you might do this. So I'm definitely not advocating for some kind of MFL SATs. I'm not sure not many people are going to get on board with that. But it does remind me a little bit of whenever there's a subject which hasn't got any real assessment, and it's almost considered as one of the fun subjects like music. So I remember, I mean, we in our school, some of the children have in one particular year they have whole class music lessons provided by an outside provider, and for some of the children they make great progress, but because there's 30 children playing an instrument at the same time, it's very possible for some of them to kind of float through the whole year and not really learn a great deal at all. And I think the same thing can happen in languages, especially if there's a lot of choral response. So that, yeah, I suppose there's some of the main factors, which means the picture is a lot bigger than just in what happens on the day to day in schools. The whole system, it's almost, I don't want to be too negative, but it almost feels like it's set up Not to fail, but just not to get very far.
The idea that English is this lingua franca, and there's not necessarily the necessity to learn another language to a really decent proficiency, I think is an issue. I think the CPD on languages, I smiled when you mentioned that because normally it's some sort of CD and a collection of songs and rhymes and things like that there. And, I think, I see people doing what look like really good things, obviously, but I've never had really high quality CPD. And my own language learning journey has just been sort of trial and error. And I think there's a bit of an issue with the fact that that sort of community in the broader terms, like the YouTube language learning sphere or whatever, it's a bit of a grift, and you've got people who are pretending to have this level of proficiency and stuff. And so a lot of the messages that are out there about how to really effectively learn a language, they feel nice and warm and fuzzy, but we're not actually applying what we know. And just listening to your sort of description of some of the issues and some of the things that influence language learning proficiency in UK schools, my gut says we're not taking what we know about effective learning. And that's probably because it's not really a priority and we don't really have the time. So it's an interesting one. I mean, with the transition, would you be in favor of not teaching language as a key stage 2 in order to have a clean slate in key stage 3, or is that too far?
Yeah, I mean, reading about the trends is nice. Love a provocative question. I mean, the whole sort of title of the well, the topic, I have to make it fairly provocative. Like, why are other countries so much better than we are? Why are we so bad? And like you say, we're not trying to be down on all the teachers who put a lot. I'm sure there are plenty of teachers who really do value MFL and put a lot of effort into it. No, the general trend across Europe is actually to start languages even earlier. So I couldn't give you an on average, but the majority of countries will be starting it at about the same point as us, and many even earlier. I mean, one friend that we have, Slovakian, grew up in Slovakia, and they even started it in their preschool, in their equivalent. So no, I don't think. I see where you're coming from, in that, yeah, everyone would have a clean. I don't think we'd be any better off though than where we are now. Maybe, I mean, we're sort of dreaming now, but what some a little bit more in the way of flesh on the bones of what is expected from each year group, perhaps would be quite useful. Um, reading the When you read the national curriculum for Key Stage 2, and read some of the aims, they feel quite lofty, and rightfully so. Um, Now, such as, I'll just read out a couple. The aims of the national curriculum. MFL: understand and respond to spoken and written language from a variety of authentic sources. I think that sounds pretty good. Speak with increasing confidence, fluency, and spontaneity, finding ways of communicating what they want to say, and I think that's fantastic. But it's how do you get there? I mean, the vast majority of schools use some sort of scheme. I mean, where I teach, we have a scheme, and I think it's a very very good scheme. Um, but it's how do you take what's, as with anything, I'm sure it'd be the same if you're thinking, oh, maybe you use white rose in maths. It's how do you take what's there and deliver it. And if I think maybe what I didn't mention before, but one, perhaps even the most significant factor in bridging the gap between the cultural background and what happens in the meat and the bones of the lesson is the language confidence of your average primary school teacher. I don't think there's no minimum requirement of language, which would be quite frankly laughable in many countries where you have to. I mean, I've got them down here somewhere, but yeah, in the Czech Republic, for example, you've to teach English, you have to have a degree in English, or at least the equivalent of a C1 level on the Common European Framework of references for reference for languages. So that's basically fluent. You have to be fluent, but we because I suppose because of the system we have where for the most part, everyone teaches everything, and MFL is a long way down the ladder in terms of schools' priorities. You've got a situation where people are trying their best, but you can't freewheel, you can't talk off the cuff in a language that you don't speak. Um, yeah, so we're a little bit stuck, and that's not going to change overnight. So that's why we do rely on the schemes. I think the schools that probably do it there, that where the children probably have the best deal is where a specialist comes in, perhaps from the languages department of a secondary school. I think again it might have been in the British Council report. I think it's somewhere in the region of about 20%, might even be slightly lower, of schools who have yeah, someone coming to do that. You know, my first job I taught in, this was the case, and I think it was definitely the best I've seen, because obviously they're an expert. They can with a lot more fluidity move the lesson in the direction that they want to. They know a lot more about the background, and I think the children made the most progress. So yeah, I think that's probably the ideal for where we're at.
It's funny you mentioned the CEFR because as I was listening to the aims of the national curriculum and then thinking about the different levels within the Common European Framework, I think we could potentially solve, or not solve, but address both of these sort of issues by reducing the burden on teachers, but setting more realistic aims given the time frame that we have to teach. So, this is just my opinion. This isn't necessarily, this is just based on trial and error and what I sort of think is important. But we always talk about you need to have knowledge in order to think. And so the generation of language and the production of language relies on a lot of background knowledge. And so if we want pupils to speak in foreign languages, with increased confidence in things, I think we need to give them a lot of vocabulary before we go anywhere near the grammar. So, in my experience, we'll typically focus on phrasing and we'll focus on common things, almost like survival, and common situations. Whereas if we spent 2 years, 4 years building a bank of, say, we know what the 80% of the language that you could choose most. If the expectation on primary wasn't expression on things that you find in B2, C1 in the CEFR, but if we said, okay, we're gonna really commit these words to memory, perhaps even their conjugations, in certain circumstances, maybe present tense, simple past tense, and then you can introduce others later on. But if we just did that for 4 years, and then by the time they went into secondary school, they could then start looking at sentence level grammatical constructs, I think you've got a much better chance of getting to some level of expression by the time you're 13 years old, rather than trying to learn, the get by phrases in primary school. I mean, how does that sit? I mean, I don't want to bridge into the questions later, but how does that sit with your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it is interesting. It reminds me of what I believe. I mean, I don't want to tread any secondary school teachers, any MFL teachers in secondary might be listening to this, um, who are going to say, "Oh, that's totally not what we're doing." But as far as I understand, this September, kind of reformed language GCSE begun, which focused on about 1,700 word families, or slightly less for foundation tier, which are taken from the statistically selected most common words. So if that sort of thing's happening much further along the line, so definitely someone sat down and thought, well, right, well, what do we know about how we learn, how we use our vocabulary, background knowledge? But I don't think there's any sense in which that's about to happen in Key Stage 2. I don't know. I think it's difficult to say, isn't it? Because no one's done it before. But I think something is definitely value about learning certain structures, even if it's at the very beginning, whether it's how to have those basic introductory conversations like hello, how are you, um, and songs and rhymes and things like that. But yeah, I think you struggle mostly because you don't have any vocabulary. I mean, that's the case for me as well. Trying to learn German. I probably been going for about 3 years, and when I'm there, I can hear lots of words and understand lots of words, but I just don't have enough vocabulary to be able to put the whole sentence together. So you hear word, don't know that word, don't know that word. So you're out of the game. Um, I mean, I remember you saying in a previous episode you've learned a lot of Spanish lately, Kira. Is that how you went about it, or is it Duolingo all the way?
I normally start with the list of the the 20% of words that get used 80% of the time, and I'll have a flashcard system. I'll often start with the most commonly used verbs, and not all of them are applicable to my life and the kind of conversations I want to have. So for instance, I'll do a lot of front loading of the vocabulary that's relevant to education, you know, and you'll often find they've got a lot of cognates in certainly in Spanish, but because they've normally got Latin, like cognition, that kind of thing, it's not difficult. Um, but you need to really, you need to do a lot of vocabulary instruction, and then you need really high quality teaching, with high quality feedback on where you went wrong, how you can improve that. And then you take on, there's a whole big fad about, this barely comprehensible input where you've got like, that's not the official type, but comprehensible input is the general ballpark where once you get to a certain level, then you're then trying to take on as much information through reading and through watching and things like that. And that's a big part of my routine, you know. But it took me 5 years of doing at least 30 minutes every single day to get to C1 in Spanish. To the point when I go out and work in Spain now, reasonably, it's a reasonably easy process in the airport, that kind of thing. But then you bring in things like dialects. I take almost like a graded approach where I will focus on things before I get anywhere near using it, because the issue you're having there is totally normal. But you're an adult and you've got time to take in input and to develop your sort of listening comprehension over time, and you can really practice that. And what I don't think is we don't have the expertise or the time within schools to allow children to go through that process, certainly not in primary school. So that's sort of where I am, as I'm thinking, okay, is the best use of our time flashcards every day? We know what words they need to have committed to memory by the end of year 6. Go from there. But this is just all spitballing as opposed to any sort of refined and clearly structured approach to supporting pupils in school.
Yeah, definitely. And I think whatever we might come up with and think, oh, this is the way that it should be done, you're always going to come up against the time element. I think we're we're always saying, oh, the curriculum's too full, the curriculum's too full. Right, okay, we're gonna see what we can leave out. And it's a little bit like, I think it's a little bit like spring cleaning your house. We might think, right, I'm going to be ruthless. I'm gonna go through every drawer, every room. And you start off, and then you think, oh, I might need that. Oh, actually, I might need that. And I guess it always seems to in these conversations, it comes back to, well, maybe we can get rid of Roman numerals, maybe not. Um, and so you're always going to have a subject like MFL or I don't know, art or music or DT. It's at the bottom of the pile. And while we might say, right, okay, we're going to do flashcards, it's really difficult to fit in. So I've been trying to have a go at this in my own classroom this year, and I think the best thing is just slip in where you can into the day-to-day routine, just little bits where it doesn't take any extra time, like taking the register, and if all that the pupil is saying is bon après-midi or buenos dias, and it's not costing, well, apart from the first few times, and it's like you've asked them to recite pi to the 8th place or something, but after a while it just becomes normal. Classroom commands, you can very quickly, especially if you're doing a gesture with it, show me your whiteboards in the given language, and it's just dropping it in, ordering their lunch. Um, but beyond that, it's quite difficult without some serious big changes to how you run the day, and the vast majority of teachers were backs to the wall for time. Um, so it's always going to be a challenge from that level.
Given the widespread use of English globally, what do you see as the primary purpose of language learning for UK students? And how could this shape our approach?
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier on, with English being the lingua franca, so to speak, every other country in Europe particularly knows that if you learn English, it's a kind of a gateway language. You can communicate not only to people from an English speaking country, but you might have someone from Italy talking to someone from Denmark in English. Whereas we have to decide firstly which language do you choose? Do you choose French because it's often it's quite widely known as the EU language often. Don't quote me on that, but or the Olympics or all sorts of things. I know they're closest neighbours. Um, do you pick Spanish because it's maybe more widely spoken? But then you think, well, it's largely in South America. So yeah, even you've got a decision to make there. And then there's the question of motivation. I think is the most pertinent issue relating to this because you've got the ever improving technology. I believe it's almost or already is possible, but to have an in-ear device that you can put in and it can translate basically is in real time. So if you've got that, you might say, "Oh, what's the point in learning a language if if I can just translate in my ear?" Or you can point your phone at a sign in Thailand and it will translate it for you just on your screen. Which I think it reminds me a little bit of the if we've got a calculator, what's the point in learning maths argument? But if anything, it's stronger than that because I think most people will still understand that way. There are lots of elements of maths that you can't use a calculator for, or you want to have that fluency off the cuff. But if you have a earbud in which can do it for you, then what if your battery runs out? Is not going to be a strong enough argument. So we need some good reasons before we're gonna make any inroads in language learning in schools. I think the cognitive benefits of language learning are often mentioned. I think it's difficult to get any hard numbers on this, but it definitely is shown in research to improve your memory, improve your ability to task switch, improve your attention, um, which in itself is a worthwhile process. If you want to have genuine interactions where maybe you're sitting around a table in a restaurant with someone then there's always going to be an element of artificiality if you oh sorry hang on 1 minute I've got to put this in or I've got to type it into my phone. But I think it's very difficult, especially at key stage 2, to use the sort of or one day in 15 years you might need to speak possibly this language that we're learning or possibly another one. So it is difficult, and so I think we've got to think very carefully about what reasons we give a year 5 pupil that they're learning French on a Thursday afternoon at 2:30. Quick, we've got to hurry up because we've got to go to the library and then go home. So a few years ago, half my week teaching was doing PPA cover, and one of my sessions was year 6 French on a Monday afternoon, and I think we all slightly dreaded it, to be honest. And so I think, and that's because it was amazing school, brilliant school, but for whatever reason, as is so often the case, the previous few years of learning French had not really stuck with the majority of pupils. So you can end up doing that. Well, I know it's boring, but we've got to do it. Sort of trying to enter into a little sort of pact with the class, and I don't think that ever works really. And there are other reasons which are classically given. It's well, imagine you want to go on holiday to Spain. I think that's also it's a pretty poor reason, because if anyone's already been on holiday to Spain, they've probably already experienced that they can get by just fine with nada. So you're not going to get very far with that. I think if we're thinking about motivation more generally, being good at it is the best motivator. So if we can maybe leave some of the, let's just say some of the cliches aside and just try and make sure that children feel successful, even if it's at a really basic level to begin with, that's going to be a much more powerful motivator. And I know I definitely don't want to go down the road of everything has to be fun, but it will be more fun if they feel like when you stand at the front and you ask a question, they have a chance, or if they're singing a song in that language, that always actually is quite entertaining because they feel like they can join in, and for some reason it sticks so much better. So yeah, so to summarize, there are good reasons that we can give children for learning languages. There are maybe less effective reasons. Some of them are good reasons, but it's a long way in the future, so it's hard for them to really feel super motivated by like future work or future um, opportunities for language learning different languages in the future. So really, we just need to make sure pupils are successful at whatever language or whatever level we're teaching them at whatever stage.
As I'm listening to you in general, I'm seeing a lot of parallels with mathematics because obviously the big thing in maths is, when will I ever use this? And well, and we're always sort of pushing the idea that, well, actually, it's a worthwhile endeavor on its own. It's a beautiful thing to understand mathematics, to have access to the world and to the universe through mathematics. And equally, there's an issue of transition, like you mentioned earlier, where lots of kids will start from the start, even though we do have standardized assessments at the end of Key Stage 2. And so I'm seeing that in languages. The only difference is that it's not a core subject officially, but you've essentially got these two siblings. Because learning a language, some of the languages I spend my time learning, I'm probably never going to use, certainly not in public, but I can watch certain types of TV show in that language, listen to music in different languages. And also, like you say, I remember reading this paper about this chess master who managed to stave off Alzheimer's, and they only really knew he had Alzheimer's or dementia post mortem. And I think that's actually the only way you can officially know if someone has it. Post mortem, they analyzed his brain, and he had managed to sort of reduce this by constantly learning and constantly thinking. So it's a good habit to get into. And also, if we give children those habits young, you speak to people who know 4, 5, 6 languages. They were learning a second language straight out of the gate, and then they use that knowledge. I can learn this to then to propel future learning. So I'm totally with you, and I can see it. I can see so many parallels with mathematics. This is something that's worth doing just because it's worth doing, not because of any, because I might go to the Costa del Sol on my holidays, because that's tourist attractions or tourist places are usually the hardest places to get anyone to speak English or not speak English with you. And it's only in situations where the person doesn't have English themselves that you get a chance to actually use the language with them. So I think, yeah, I'm seeing a lot there, and I think, yeah, languages are important for many many reasons, but I think chief among them is that it's a worthwhile process, and it's on its own.
Yeah, and we do as a whole, again, I'm totally generalizing, but we do have a like a national psyche of we're rubbish at this. And that filters down. It's maybe again it's comparable to maths where people might say, oh my, in parents' evening, it's like, oh, I'm rubbish at maths, or that's why they're no good at maths, and but on a national level, it filters down, and we just think, well, even if I do spend, you know, all my time at secondary, even if I pick it for A level, I'm still never really gonna be any good at it, any good at it. And then I think about there'll be people all over the world who have a fraction of the opportunity that most people in this country through our educational system will get, and they're fluent in 2, 3 languages, and so it's not impossible, but it's just a very widespread, deep rooted perhaps lack of self-efficacy or just an attitude that runs deep. But I think it is something that can change. So I was thinking about how in Eastern Europe, even sort of 50 years ago, very, very few people were learning English in some countries. And if you think about places like, as it was known, Czechoslovakia or Estonia, that were behind the Iron Curtain, and no one was learning English. And now, in one of the countries I was reading a little bit about, Estonia, it's it's vital, really. I think, was it even if you want to go on to further education? Oh no, it was Latvia. Sorry, if in Latvia, if you want to go on to further education, you have to know English, and I'm sure it's the same in other countries as well. So in a generation, things can change. So it's not saying, I don't want to buy into, oh, we're rubbish at it, we don't really need to do it, so let's not bother. But it is very tricky when you start thinking, what can we actually do? Because so much of it is, like we discussed earlier, a bit systemic.
I think that transitions very nicely into my next question. I mean, what specific teaching strategies or methods, perhaps used by our European neighbours, could be effectively implemented in UK primary schools? And obviously, I've given my uninformed, uneducated 2 cents. But I mean, what do you think? What can we do to really raise our game? And perhaps with a focus on things that we can control as teachers, because lots of leaders will be listening, and they will have greater power to implement change on certainly within the system, the ecosystem within their school. And obviously, we're talking about, we're using broad brush to say methods used by European counterparts, because obviously they'll be using a range. But what can we do, specific teaching strategies or methods to be more effective in our modern foreign language teaching?
Thanks for the disclaimer there, because it's going to be very broad, even between day to day. I think maybe it'd be maybe interesting to look at a little example. Uh, I think I might have mentioned earlier on, there's a friend of ours who is Slovakian, and she gave us a little bit of an insight into what her English learning was like. And it's a few years ago, so it might have changed a little bit, but she said they had 3 lessons a week in for most of primary school. Um, and one of the lessons, they might start off by checking the homework, checking what they might have done in a previous lesson, which I guess amounts to an element of retrieval practice. And they would have a textbook, and they'd go through uh, perhaps a new grammar concept or some new vocab in the textbook, and then they'd fill in some exercises. Uh, and then practice what they learned through lots of speaking, maybe some songs, some rhymes, things like that. And that'd be one lesson, which sounds like quite a traditional lesson. There's nothing that's going to take anyone by surprise there. Then they'd also have a lesson on a cultural topic every week, so maybe learning about a type of festival or historical element of the country, which I mean that's probably very helpful in understanding the bigger picture. I don't know if that's something that's going to be in our system anytime soon. And then they had also one lesson, which is not necessarily what everyone had, but they had someone who would do conversation groups, and everyone would be expected to speak. Um, and comparing that to uh, the examples I've heard about and spoken to people about in Germany, one of the big factors is the amount that you're expected to speak. Everyone's expected to speak in every lesson. The teacher will mostly speak the the target language. So in this case, it's English, but in our case, it might be French, German, Spanish in the lesson. And so there's a lot of immersion, which I think does happen in secondary schools quite a lot. If I think back to my French A level, yeah, the vast majority of the lesson was in French, but that's not happening in primary school, whereas it is happening in primary schools across the continent. Yeah, but interestingly, there's no one magic bullet that we've somehow missed. I think the elements that we would recognize as good teaching across any subject are there. There's retrieval practice, there's looking at new content, scaffolding, whether it's sentences on the board, um, flashcards, all the things you might expect, just lots of it, and with quite a high participation expectation. Everyone has to answer. It's not just as you get it, probably every MFL class in Key Stage 2 in the country, there'll be those two or three who actually really just got it, or they've practiced at home, or for whatever reason they're really on the ball. Everyone has to speak, even if it's just at a you know, quite a simple basic level. And I think that's, if we're saying what's one big difference that we really could make, it's that increasing that participation and also that immersion as well.
What role do you believe time allocation and curriculum design play in language acquisition? And how might UK schools better balance these factors with other curricular demands? Because this has come up the whole way through our conversation. What do you think? I mean, because it feels like that feeds in from what you're saying there.
Yeah, time allocation is it's the big deal. I mean, whatever we prioritize, we give more time to. So imagine if we only taught writing once a week. Um, so yeah, it's going to be very difficult to have more than one session of MFL a week. But even that can be a push in a crowded timetable. Um, Whereas in, like I think I mentioned in Slovakia, this friend of ours who was doing it 3 times a week in primary school. In I think it just across the continent, it's 5 to 10% of curriculum time in primary school, and if you do it once a week, that is 5%. But for the most part, it's going to be more than that. Um, Again, it's always like I keep saying, it's always going to be a conflict, because the next 6 episodes, you could have someone on from DT. The art episode a few weeks ago was great and made me think, oh yeah, this is really important. We need to make sure this doesn't get crowded out. Music, even then drama and all sorts of things which already have been crowded out. So yeah, no one's. I don't think. I think it'd be very difficult for a school leader to say, right, we're gonna have MFL twice a week, and it's going to be an hour long session, and it's going to have this, and this. But we could, um, yeah, it's not to say we can't learn anything from um, from European neighbours who are a little bit more successful, a little bit further ahead. Yeah, a lot of the schemes that are used do incorporate the phonics of the language, and I think it's a really important thing not to drop. I think sometimes I've definitely felt, well, we've got pupils in the class who are not 100% confident with their English phonics, so I don't want to throw in all these other sound spelling correspondences that are going to confuse them even more. But the research definitely shows that behind a clear progression of phonics in the target language is really, really effective, and that it should be planned which graphemes, which phonemes come up within different units, different lessons. So I think that's really something that's in whatever program you buy into, or specialist you have, that's more their responsibility. So it's not something for the individual teacher to worry about from a planning point of view, but from a delivery, from you as a teacher teaching it, making sure that you draw attention to whether it is in French, or this letter is silent, or EUX, that makes this sound. That's a really important part of it as well. I mean, if we're thinking, you've got a magic wish and you can do anything you want, then yeah, I think it definitely should be. It should be well planned out what the expectation is for each year group. Year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6. This is what you're going to do. These are the key vocabulary elements you're going to study. These are the grammar concepts, which is it. I don't think it's impossible. And then ideally, it's compulsory till GCSE, but uh, just a humble primary school teacher has no power, no power in that element. Yeah, with that, and like I've touched on before, if teachers could have a little bit more in the way of CPD experience with the language, or it can be someone within the school who's a bit of who's more of an expert delivering it. So you've got your delivery, you've got your progression, and the time. Some of those you can do something about, some of those you can't do a huge amount about. Um, which kind of, I suppose, it kind of sums up the whole topic. It can feel like you're going around in circles, saying, "Oh, well, it'd be really good if we did this." We can't do that because X, Y, and Z. The system is set up against it. But it's probably quite a frustrating listen for the listeners. But there are, if there's one thing you can take away, it's that if you just do the little things like classroom commands, like doing your countdown, cinco, cuatro, tres, that will make some difference in increasing the profile of the languages within your classroom.
Certainly that last question, it's one that there may not be an answer to. And I've said to myself this year, I'm going to be better at asking people to share their thoughts. So if anyone's listening and they can think of a solution to the time allocation issue that we have with modern foreign languages, please put a comment. You could be listening on Spotify, you could be listening on YouTube, you could be listening on Apple Podcasts. Leave a comment with what you do or what you think we should do. And then we could perhaps continue the conversation there, because I think this is probably the time allocation might be an episode in itself, balancing those factors across. I think you've done a really good job of outlining where we could go, and those 3 key points, I think, make a whole lot of sense. But I think it's one that we as a group of countries in the United Kingdom will be battling with for quite a while. Now, you're going to be talking about this at the TDAPE conference in London in just over a week's time from now, because I think by the time, maybe 2 weeks by the time this episode goes out. Have I taken all of your content, or is there anything else that you're going to really focus your attention on during that session?
Hopefully it'll be a little bit more sequenced and coherent in the session. Hopefully also there'll be a bit of a interactive element, a chance for people who've clearly have an interest in MFL to be able to share some of their experiences, and we can maybe weep together or celebrate what people are doing. But really looking forward to it. I'm sure it's going to be a great day. Looking forward to hearing some of the other speakers as well.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited now. I think ticket sales close on the 11th. So we've really only got a couple of days, because I need to do the food order, and obviously with them, making sure that the caterers have full information and stuff. So I had to close tickets a week early. So really the clock is ticking. So if you want to come to the TDAPE conference, you want to learn from your colleagues and really inspirational teachers, now is the time. I'll make sure I put a link in the description to those tickets. But it's going to be a great day. We've got some fantastic speakers. I've really enjoyed this chat, Charles. I think I always say this, but I think we've only just scratched the surface. So hopefully you'll come back in the future as we sort of refine. I think this might be the first time we've really discussed modern foreign languages on TDAPE. But please, I hope this is only the first of many sort of interviews where we explore this subject in depth.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Big fan of the podcast, so slightly surreal. So thanks very much.
Hopefully you're not feeling quite as bemused as you were at the start of the episode. All that's left to do is say thank you very much. And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.